James Lockman had always been a quiet, hard-working man. As the chief of police in his city, he preferred to keep his work life separate from his home life. He had earned his position through dedication and integrity, and while the job came with its fair share of challenges, nothing could prepare him for the battle he faced within his own neighborhood. His biggest problem wasn't crime, it was Brenda Carlson. Brenda had lived next door for years, a self-proclaimed guardian of the community, though most saw her as nothing more than a nosy, overbearing nuisance. With her exaggerated sense of power, she used the homeowners association to make life miserable for those she deemed unfit for the neighborhood. And to Brenda, James was exactly that. It started with petty things, anonymous complaints about the color of his shutters, claims that his lawn was always a quarter-inch too high, and reports of suspicious activity when his friends or family visited. James had brushed it off, knowing that people like Brenda thrived on attention. But her behavior escalated over time. She would glare at him from her porch, whisper to neighbors when he walked by, and even go out of her way to make his life difficult. She called in noise complaints on nights when his house was completely silent. She harassed delivery drivers bringing packages to his home. And when that didn't get the reaction she wanted, she took things even further. One evening, as James was pulling into his driveway, he heard Brenda speaking in hushed tones with another neighbor. Her words stopped him in his tracks. "Trust me, after tonight, he won't be a problem anymore." James felt the weight of those words settle in his gut. He had dealt with criminals and manipulators for years, but Brenda was something different, a schemer who thought she was untouchable. What James didn't know yet was that Brenda was about to cross a line she could never come back from. Brenda Carlson had spent years terrorizing James, but to her frustration, nothing had worked. He never reacted the way she wanted. No angry confrontations. No heated arguments. He simply ignored her, and that infuriated her more than anything. She wanted him gone. That night, she made her boldest move yet. She picked up the phone and dialed the police, putting on her best act. "Yes, I need to report something dangerous," she whispered frantically. "My neighbor, James Lockman, he's involved in something illegal. I don't know exactly what, but I've seen strange people coming and going from his house. It's not safe. He needs to be stopped before someone gets hurt." She gasped for added effect, pretending to be on the verge of tears. The officer on the other end hesitated. "Ma'am, do you have any actual evidence of a crime?" Brenda scoffed. "You think he'd leave evidence lying around? He's smart. He knows how to cover his tracks. But I heard rumors that he might try to flee the city tonight. You need to put something in place to stop him." The young officer, eager to prove himself, took her words seriously. Before long, Brenda had convinced him that James was a dangerous individual who might run from the law at any moment. A decision was made: spike strips would be placed on his driveway. Brenda could barely contain her excitement. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. When James came home, his tires would be shredded, and police would show up, thinking he was a criminal. With luck, he'd be taken away in handcuffs, humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood. There was just one thing she hadn't considered. The call she made went directly to James's department, and he was the one who saw it first. Sitting in his office, James stared at the report, his jaw tightening. Brenda had just made a very, very big mistake. He could have stopped it immediately, but a better idea took shape in his mind. This was his chance to finally put an end to her harassment once and for all. If she wanted to set a trap for him, he would let her. But it wouldn't end the way she expected. James had spent years dealing with criminals, but Brenda Carlson wasn't just a lawbreaker, she was a manipulator who believed she was above the rules. This time, however, she had made the mistake of dragging his officers into her web of deceit. And now, she was about to face the consequences. With the trap set, James instructed his officers to proceed as if they genuinely believed Brenda's false claims. He wanted her to think she had won, to feel that rush of power she craved, before pulling the rug out from under her. From a distance, James watched as officers, unaware of the full picture, laid down the spike strips at the entrance of his driveway. The tension in the air was thick as he got into his vehicle, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He knew exactly what was coming. As he pulled into his driveway, his tires met the spikes with a sharp pop, 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 the unmistakable sound of rubber being shredded. His car lurched forward before coming to an abrupt stop, the rims scraping against the pavement. Right on cue, Brenda burst out onto her front porch, grinning like she had just won the lottery. She clutched her phone dramatically as if she had just caught the crime of the century unfolding before her very eyes. "I told you," she screeched, her voice shrill with excitement as she called the police. "He just ran over the spike strips. He's trying to flee. Arrest him now." The officers who had set the trap quickly arrived at the scene, their expressions unreadable as they approached James's vehicle. But none of them moved to arrest him. Instead, James calmly stepped out of his car, his uniform pristine, his posture unwavering. As he adjusted his badge, its golden gleam reflected in the porch light. Brenda's expression shifted from smugness to confusion. The reality of the situation had not yet dawned on her. One of the officers turned toward her with an unreadable expression. "Ma'am, do you realize who this is?" Brenda scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Of course, I know. He's a criminal. A menace. That's why I've been trying to get rid of him for years. Now, do your job and take him away." James took a slow, deliberate step forward, his gaze locked onto Brenda. "You're absolutely right about one thing, Brenda," he said, his voice steady. "Tonight, someone is getting arrested." Brenda's smirk faltered. She blinked. What? James raised his radio to his lips and issued the final command that would end her reign of terror. "Brenda Carlson is under arrest for filing a false police report, harassment, and discrimination." The color drained from Brenda's face as two officers turned toward her. For the first time in years, she was speechless. The front porch lights illuminated Brenda's horror-stricken face as two uniformed officers stepped onto her lawn. The arrogant confidence that had carried her for so long crumbled in an instant. "Wait. No, this is a mistake." Brenda stammered, stepping backward. "You can't do this. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood." One of the officers sighed and pulled out his notepad. "Ma'am, we have multiple false police reports on file, and we've just witnessed you directly interfere with law enforcement procedures." James stepped closer, his voice firm but controlled. "Brenda, you lied to the police. You manipulated an officer into setting a trap for me. And all because you couldn't stand the idea of me living here. That's not just harassment. That's a crime." Brenda shook her head furiously. "This isn't happening. This is a setup. You're making this up to get back at me." James let out a short, humorless laugh. "I don't need to get back at you, Brenda. You did this to yourself." Brenda turned to the other officers, her voice turning shrill. "You can't seriously be listening to him. I was just looking out for everyone. I didn't mean any harm. This is ridiculous." The second officer exchanged a glance with his partner before reaching for his handcuffs. "Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back." Brenda's eyes widened in pure panic. She took another step back. "Wait, no. You don't understand. I was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. That's not a crime." James crossed his arms. "Actually, filing false reports, tampering with law enforcement, and harassment. Those are all crimes." Brenda whirled back to the officers. I'll sue. I'll have your badges for this. You're arresting the wrong person." She flailed as the officers grabbed her arms and turned her around. Cold steel clicked around her wrists, and for the first time, Brenda Carlson was powerless. The once feared neighborhood tyrant was now just another criminal in custody. As she was escorted toward the waiting police vehicle, the reality of the situation seemed to finally hit her. Her knees buckled slightly, and she tried one last desperate attempt at pleading. "James, please, this is all a big misunderstanding. I was just trying to." James didn't let her finish. "You were just trying to ruin my life. And now, you're facing the consequences." Brenda was loaded into the car, her screams fading as the door shut. The flashing red and blue lights painted eerie reflections on the pavement as the vehicle pulled away. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt peaceful. As James stood in the cool night air, a few neighbors cautiously stepped outside, whispering among themselves. Some gave him nods of approval. Others simply breathed sighs of relief. Brenda Carlson had always been the loudest voice in the neighborhood, but now, her screams carried a very different meaning. As officers dragged her toward the squad car, she kicked, thrashed, and shrieked, demanding to be released. "You'll regret this," she screeched, her face red with fury. "You're ruining an innocent woman's life. You'll all be sorry." Her words fell on deaf ears. The officers had seen this kind of behavior before, people who thought they were untouchable, only to realize too late that consequences come for everyone. James watched from the sidewalk as Brenda was placed into the back of the police cruiser. She still refused to accept reality, her face twisted in outrage. But justice had finally caught up to her. Within hours, the news spread like wildfire. Brenda's arrest sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Some residents were shocked, others relieved. A few even gathered outside their homes, watching in stunned silence as the woman who had terrorized their community for years was driven away in handcuffs. The legal process moved swiftly. The prosecution presented an airtight case against Brenda. The false police reports, the recorded 911 calls, the testimonies from multiple neighbors who had witnessed her harassment, it all painted a damning picture of a woman obsessed with control and discrimination. The most compelling evidence was the spike strip incident itself. Footage from a nearby security camera showed the police placing the strips at Brenda's urging, proving that she had deliberately weaponized law enforcement against an innocent man. During the trial, Brenda sat stiffly in the defendant's chair, her usual arrogance replaced with a cold, empty stare. She no longer had the upper hand. The courtroom wasn't her playground, it was the place where her lies had finally caught up to her. Despite her best attempts to plead innocent, the judge saw right through her manipulations. When the verdict was read, the words rang through the courtroom like a hammer striking the final nail in her coffin. Guilty. Brenda Carlson was sentenced to 10 years in prison for harassment, falsifying police reports, and committing a hate crime. As the bailiffs led her away, she finally understood the truth: there were no more tricks to play. No more false reports to file. No more people to control. The reign of Brenda Carlson was over.